Very, very welcome to this evening, which I think is going to be a very memorable evening. We are having some technical challenges, but I think now we have the foreign minister also on video. So my name is Erik Bergdorf. I'm the director of the Institute of Global Affairs here at LSE, and we are hosting this event together with the Center for Women, Peace and Security, which is one of the centers under IGA. So I returned from academia and joined the LSE in February and from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. On my second day of work, I was asked to take part in the opening of the Center for Women, Peace and Security, and with no one less than the then Foreign Secretary William Hague and Angelina Jolie Pitt, as she emphasized. So that was the opening of that center, and the center was open to mark the 15th anniversary of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. It was an exciting beginning to what is a very exciting project to build this Institute of Global Affairs here at the LSE. So the IGA was created to bring together faculty and students across disciplines, across regions, to think about and act on global challenges like climate, migration, health, security and finance, always remembering that for every global challenge, you need to understand the global context, the local context, and connecting the global and the local is critical to what IGA does. And this Center for Women, Peace, Security is very much in that spirit. It's about finding locally rooted solutions to deal with important challenges. We believe this is a very special evening because we will be discussing very important topics, and we have assembled a most remarkable constellation of speakers. A key European policymaker, a phenomenal activist, and a leading academic, all deeply committed to the women, peace and security agenda. So let me first introduce the Swedish Foreign Minister Margot Wallström, who comes to us over videolink. Hey. So Margot Wallström approaches this topic with exceptional experience. She has worked locally and nationally in Swedish politics. She has been the Vice President of the European Commission, and she has been on the international scene as the UN Special Envoy on sexual violence against women in conflict. And when the new government took office last year, she surprised the world by announcing that Sweden from then on had a feminist foreign policy and shining a much-needed spotlight on the agenda of women, peace and security. She is a major moral voice around the world for the women's issues and, of course, now, very importantly, in the migrant crisis, where she has been urging fellow European policymakers to come together and recognize common values. We are very honored to have you here and that you take time to talk to us tonight. You will do so in conversation with an LSE alumna, the wonderfully charismatic Zainab Salbi. She is the founder of Women for Women, an organization that by now has helped close to 430,000 women who have been exposed to conflict and sexual violence around the world. Zainab, herself a victim of sexual violence, has inspired women and men around the world and to support these women and provided valuable on-the-ground evidence to policymakers. I think no one can resist her vision, her unique perception and spiritual energy. She has certainly been a great inspiration for me over the years. In her latest incarnation as the Oprah of the Middle East, Zainab has launched a talk show which is televised across the Middle East and where Oprah herself appeared in the first installment. And Zainab, we are very pleased to have you here back at the LSE. So Margot Wallström and Zainab Salbi will have a conversation, but I'm delighted to be joined here on stage with my co-chairwoman, Professor Christine Jenkins. She is a professor. She is a professor of international law here at the LSE, but she was also the University of Michigan Law School professor of global law. In her work, she has shown that international law to date has largely ignored the fundamental issues of gender inequality and tended to marginalize women in both its formal and informal institutions. Far from challenging the global oppression of women, international law has upheld the unequal position around the world. Christine has single-handedly changed the way international law is taught and practiced around the world. It's an honor to have Christine as a colleague and a partner in the building of the Institute of Global Affairs. So I would like, before I hand over to Christine, just add a personal note, because I came back from policymaking and crisis response, and I had the pleasure then to draw on the resources, the fantastic resources of LSE and its faculty and students, for that matter, and faculty like Christine. So it's a real honor for me now to be back in academia, play a part in helping to bring some of this knowledge and this experience into policy making, and here in the UK, but also around the world. So before we go to Zainab and the Foreign Minister, Christine, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Thank you very much for that very warm introduction. Can I welcome you all on behalf of the Centre for Women, Peace and Security, as well as the Institute. I'm not quite sure how this co-chairing works, Eric, but anyway, we will work it together. As Eric has just indicated, the Centre, and I'm sure many of you already know that, was launched earlier this year in February. And it was established essentially out of two separate foreign policy initiatives. One was the foreign policy initiative of former Foreign Secretary William Hague and Miss Angelina Jolie Pitt, the Prevention of Sexual Violence and Armed Conflict Initiative, PSVI, as it's usually called. It was a foreign policy initiative of the UK government. It sort of spread much wider than that through, for example, the G8 declaration, through the Declaration on Prevention of Sexual violence in armed conflict, which has now been endorsed by some 150 states. So it's become quite a major sort of theme in foreign policy. The second is the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which is the agenda that has brought issues relating to women in armed conflict into the Security Council's agenda with respect to the maintenance of international peace and security. So much to the amazement of many of us, essentially bringing women's issues into the top United Nations body, the Security Council. I think that this emphasises that the impact on security and instability of sexual and gendered violence in conflict, both on communities and on the international scene, international peace and security. And that the issue is a global issue, I think is again shown by our location in the Institute of Global Affairs that Eric has just talked about, and that we can work with the various regional centres in the Institute to ensure sort of gender input into the various aspects of regional centres' work. It's a very important moment for women, peace and security. Again, as many of you who've been talking about it all day, we've had an all-day workshop co-hosted by the Centre, by Women for Women International, your former organisation, and by the Gender Action Group of Peace and Security, GAPS, the civil society, UK-based group on issues of women, peace and security. Throughout the day, we have been discussing the challenges presented by the global study on women, peace and security, a major research and consultative study that was presented to the Security Council a couple of weeks ago, followed by a debate. We were told today that more states participated in the debate in the Security Council than have ever before participated in a thematic debate before the Security Council. At the very least, states were engaging with the issues of women, peace and security. So we've been discussing various issues, particularly around the importance of prevention of sexual violence and other aspects of gendered harm in armed conflict, on women's participation, both pre-conflict and then particularly peace agreements and post-conflict reconstruction, issues around violence against women, both during conflict and outside conflict, and then a sort of wrap-up session looking at what are the challenges for taking the Women, Peace and Security agenda further beyond the 15-year anniversary of its origins in Security Council Resolution 1325. I think the overwhelming feeling at the end of the day perhaps are two basic challenges. The first is, how do we match the rhetoric of what is now a very serious agenda through the Security Council, 8 Security Council resolutions, laying out a lot of aspects of prevention, participation, accountability, relief, recovery, what are called the pillars of women, peace and security. How do we turn that into reality? What the big gap between what is said and what is actually occurring on the ground? And I think that leads to the second challenge, which is that the Security Council is essentially a very top-down institution. The Women, Peace and Security agenda began with women's non-governmental organisations, women's lobbying. It came into the Security Council, and in a sense it's now been sort of formalised within a Security Council agenda. But again, its real impact has to be at the local level. And I think in terms of foreign policy, the Women, Peace and Security agenda is perhaps unique in being, at the one hand, top-down, and the other hand, global, and on the other hand, can only be effective locally. But I've got two experts on foreign policy here who can talk far more about the broader issues of a feminist foreign policy. So I'll hand straight over.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be back to LSE. It was one of the happiest years of my life, actually, and to be back interviewing with honor and a great privilege, Madam Minister. She needs no introduction. Professor Eric already introduced her work and her dedication to civil servants and to women's rights since the 70s. She worked in all sectors of Swedish government, at the local level, national level, and then all the way to the UN, all with the dedication of women's rights and serving the people. But more than that, what is not, perhaps what you cannot read about her in the news, is that she's actually known among many circles, almost everyone I have asked about, Madam Minister, for her humble attitude, accessibilities, generosities of spirit. So it's a truly great pleasure to be interviewing you today. Thank you very, very much. More important than all of that, you are a courageous woman. The discussion, whether we use the word feminism or women's rights or all of these, is a contested discussion among women themselves, among feminist activists themselves. What's the best strategy, all of these things. And here you come, loud and bold and courageous, saying, it's going to be a feminist foreign policy agenda. How did you come? It takes courage, I must say, Can you tell us more about that? How did you come to the conclusion that let's go at it unapologetically and let's claim it for what it is? I would love to hear some background from you on that.
Thank you very much, Zainab. Thank you all for inviting me. I wish I was there in person, but it was not possible to travel to London. Now we also have, as you know, a rather difficult migration situation also in our country that we have to deal with. But thank you all for listening and for having me, although by video. Congratulations also to setting up the centers at LSE. I have been there invited as a guest speaker before, and one of my proposals at that time when I was a special representative of the UN was to actually study the real economic costs of conflict-related sexual violence. Maybe this will be possible with the centers that you have up and running by now. That would be fantastic, and I can talk more about that later. It has been said that feminism is the radical notion that women are people. I believe that human rights are women's rights, and of course, how can you have a foreign policy without noting that there is overall discrimination against women everywhere in the world? There is also violence against women. Women do not have a voice in many of the, for example, ongoing peace negotiations. So to me, and with the background and the knowledge that I carry with me, it was a given thing to say that we have to make these issues a matter of peace and security. It is not only about equality between women and men, it is really a matter of peace and security. And we declare that the feminist foreign policy as a notion of making an analysis of the situation, but also saying that everything should be tested out from words that start with an R. The rights of women, do they enjoy the same rights as men everywhere? What about representation? Are they around the table? Are they well represented, properly represented? And thirdly, what about the resources? Are resources distributed also to women's needs? Do we ask them, women, and in many cases that means also children? What about money going also to them? So it's more of an analysis and an instrument, a tool to use, rather than a ready set of opinions or a ready set of actions. But of course, we then follow up by an action plan that we will announce now, an inventory to all our embassies that have been asked to describe the situation, putting the gender lens on. And we have, of course, prepared a number of concrete proposals, and we apply it in the everyday policies. For example, asking, what about the women in the peace negotiations in Mali? Where were they? They were not around the table. They were not among the signatories of the peace deal. What about what goes on right now in Libya? Where have you seen Libya or Syria? Where are the women? And the guiding principle is nothing without them, nothing about them without them. So we follow up also on, for example, training women mediators and negotiators to provide women in a network, hopefully Nordic women, but also maybe African women that can join. Never again to hear the argument that there are no women negotiators. Sorry, that's a long...
Not at all. Actually, I mean, on the one hand, this is so inspiring. Any of us who worked in the field, this is a dream. What you're saying is a dream that we've always talked about, and here you are making it possible. And yet, you got criticism, and I was surprised at the criticism you got was not necessarily only from certain countries, but actually from Western countries, from academics. For example, Robert Egnell, from a visiting professor at Georgetown University Security Studies program, said a feminist perspective would be idealistic, naive, and potentially even dangerous in the realpolitik's power struggle between nations. What is your response to such criticism?
No. He's one of our best advocates. He's people that we use the most, because I think you have to read his whole piece where he ends up definitely being on the side of introducing a feminist foreign policy. Well, I keep quoting Gandhi, because Gandhi said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And I think this is exactly what we have to try. I think there was a giggling factor to begin with, but it silenced very quickly. It fell silent, and I think today we are instead respected for what we are doing. And I think it has to be translated into direct political action, meaning that we have to apply a feminist foreign policy to the situation that goes on in Ukraine. When we provide humanitarian assistance, when we look at what the European Union does, and we insisted to begin with to have a high-level person also in the EU, like in the UN system, that can look at how women fare in everything that we are doing, and to make sure that the women, peace and security agenda is applied also at the European level. So I think this is not something theoretical, and I think the rhetoric and all these wonderful resolutions, they're only as good as their implementation.
That's very true.
And I also believe that what we have in common is, of course, the understanding of conflict-related sexual violence, because I think that has become such a serious phenomenon, and now what New York Times called also the theology of rape that Daesh uses in Syria and Iraq, that women all over the world just have to stand up as one and say, enough is enough. This has to be stopped, because it will hurt not only the individual, but it will hurt the family, society, a nation, and our whole humanity in the end, if it is not stopped. And we know that the three misunderstandings that we have to fight have to do with the fact that it is seen as either inevitable, because it has been a part of every conflict since beginning of time, that it is unspeakable, or that it is a lesser crime. And I think that this is still the notion that we have to fight, and we have to make sure that there is no impunity for this kind of crimes.
Absolutely. What has been some of the financial and diplomatic impact on the feminist foreign policy, and both internally and externally? Like, how has the Department of Defense, for example, responded to the policy? Considering Sweden is the 12th largest weapon manufacturer, I believe, in the world. So how has there been a conflict or not?
No, it has not been a conflict, because we will look at, in every department has to look at how do we live up to the declaration that we are a feminist foreign policy. How do we ensure that the rights and the representation and the resources are distributed and attributed in the right way. So this is for every department to work on these issues, that they are integrated into all our policy areas. And of course, it is not perfect. We have to struggle in all different areas to make sure that we live up to that, and that we continue to present proposals that bring us closer to the target. But it is not, because this is, again, you come back to the fact that some believe that if you're a feminist, you could not accept that we have a defense or a defense industry. But I mean, that's not the point. Again, this is a method and a tool for analyzing every political area. And as you know, we had also a decision to finish, for example, our memorandum of understanding with Saudi Arabia, which was, I think, the right decision to make.
But it was a hard journey, if I may ask. Is it an easy journey to be morally consistent, and in a world that is, I mean, this is a genuine question, actually, is it hard to be morally consistent in a world that is very complicated with trades and all of these things? And how have you navigated that?
No, it is extremely difficult to be fighting for democracy and human rights in today's world, because I think these are issues that are pushed back, and of course with always giving the economic provisions sort of the first that come in the first place. So I think we see that around the world. Also the free speech and journalists and those who speak the truth, or those who defend feminism or women's rights, are the ones that are being attacked. So it is not easy. Nobody should believe that, but it is necessary.
Absolutely. How have your European counterparts responded to this? Do you think this encouraged other European countries to adopt a feminist policy agenda, foreign policy agenda?
Yeah, I think it creates also a pressure or an example, and they will look at us with interest to see how it is then being translated into political action. And I hope they will be inspired by that. We have many questions and comments, and the interesting thing is that also countries where they still have a long way to go when their, for example, ambassadors or ministers come to see me, they of course have done their homework, so they have read everything about our feminist foreign policy. Very often they start by saying, and you know, now we have 4 more women ministers in our cabinet, or now we have introduced this or that legislation, or now we have done so or so. So, I mean, it really pushes also the issues in the right direction, hopefully. So it's inspiring to see.
It's fantastic, actually. It's really fantastic. Do you think it helps Swedish candidacy at the Security Council membership, for the Security Council membership?
I think that for a seat on the Security Council, you have to prove that you have a political agenda that is relevant to the UN's member states, and I think we will always have to discuss substance, and this is one issue that will be important to many countries, but also our agenda when it comes to peacekeeping, peacemaking, to discuss the fact that we are the 5th biggest donor of humanitarian assistance. We finance many of the UN bodies as well, help to finance UN bodies. We are a loyal, although critical friend of the UN, and I think that is what is most important for countries who are supposed to vote on countries for a seat on the Security Council.
You mentioned earlier that we need, I completely agree by the way, we need more women in peace negotiations as mediators or in any other position. What do you do when they are not? I mean, what do you do if you are in a negotiation for any, I don't know, any country, let's say Libya, and there are no women there? What initiative you take, or do you think you can take as a government, as a foreign government?
No, sometimes I actually think it starts with somebody asking the question, where are the women? How could you once more forget or ignore women as representatives around the negotiation table? So, and sometimes there are meetings where I'm hoping that others will ask the questions, and not always me, but if nobody else does, I will have to ask or insist on women being represented, or at least that we have a structure and a system and a way to deal with these issues that take that into account, or to try to correct these mistakes. And of course we did, for example, also in the United Nations, we arranged 2 side events just recently, a couple of weeks ago, with women from Mali and women from Syria, who then sort of outside the formal procedures and processes were invited to give their views. And I think that's what we can do. We can offer that platform if they are not, until they are represented also in the formal settings.
Now, you recently visited my home country, Iraq. Where did you see any women there, and what were your impressions?
We met with quite a few women that actually spoke Swedish, because we have a large diaspora in Sweden. Almost 2% of our whole population are of Iraqi origin.
Yes.
So I think that means that we have influenced also many women, but of course this was at the core of our discussions as well. We asked to see representatives from civil society, journalists. We asked to see minority representatives, and that was very interesting. And always, if we see that there are groups of only men, we will ask, so why don't you have also any women representatives in your group? Because we discuss these issues always, and the fact that what women told us was that the level of violence against the women has risen and is just, terribly worrying. And what we could offer was then to, if they want to send people to Sweden to be given training, or if we can send experts to help them to deal with this, even to look at legislation if necessary, or other resources that they need to address this problem.
It's interesting because, Sweden played a major role in Iraq in terms of accepting refugees, as you said. It's, the country is known for its generosity among Iraqis. And I remember also a few years after the invasion of Iraq, Sweden also was the first country to say, open its embassy outside of the red zone, or outside of the green zone, in the red zone. It's like, how do we stabilize a country so people can go back to their countries? Do you think this has happened? What are your impressions of Iraq generally, particularly because Sweden was particularly a very generous country towards Iraqis?
Yeah, and we continue, of course, with our humanitarian assistance and bilateral assistance for quite some time yet. I find that there has to be a non-sectorist policy, and of course I wish Abadi all success in ensuring that there is a non-sectorist policy, an inclusive process, but the fact that this is extremely difficult and the fact that the oil prices have been going down mean also that their economy is very problematic. So all this taken, and the security situation very dangerous, means that they have I don't know what to call it. It's an enormous challenge to the society and to the leadership as well. But again, somebody said that if you look at a country like Tunisia, we had a state visit from Tunisia to Sweden, and those who visited Tunisia in the 70s came back and wrote a report saying that this country is doing really well, and we think that it's because women have a prominent role in society. And I think countries that have from the beginning involved women in building a society will be stronger, will be more resilient. And that's why it is so serious if in the peace negotiations that goes on today or new leaderships formed, if women are not represented. Right. I think they will miss out. And we know from scientific proof that this is the case. There will be more options on a negotiating table. It will be more persistent, and the peace deal will last longer, stand better chances to last longer.
Very true, very true. You started your remarks by talking about the refugee crisis and the pressure it has on Sweden. I want to actually have a very sort of open and honest discussion about it. Being an Iraqi myself, being from part of the world that is generating a lot of this crisis lately. And recently I did an article talking to Syrian refugees in different parts of Turkey and Syria. And they said that, they said our drive, they said Europeans need us because this is good for their economic growth. This is how their economy is built on migrant labor, and this is good for it. There was, my senses of it, it was a sense of not entitlement, but a sense of, and this is not to dismiss the political pressure and the economic pressure and their search for dignity and integrity, but which they believe Europe can provide that, and they rank it with Germany and Sweden as one of the top countries in that. Is that a truth, though?
That is absolutely true. Mm-hmm. We need migrants. We need these people to come to our country. They will be the ones who take care of us when we grow older, and we need them also to make our society more diverse and more exciting and more lively and more successful out of every aspect. We need to live in a society with tolerance and diversity. But the thing is, of course, as is the situation today, when we have so many children coming, unaccompanied children, for example, and a large proportion of the 100, and I'm just looking at the figures, we have around 150,000 asylum seekers in the system as of today, and 1/5 or more of them are unaccompanied children. It means also that it is an enormous strain, of course, on our systems. We need to house them, we need to make sure that they can go to school, we need to treat their traumas, we need to help them psychosocially and in every way. And we have to take care of them for, of course, many years. So it just puts, as it is today, with so many coming at the same time, it puts a strain on our systems. And this is why we are saying that we ought to help each other in the European Union and all countries in the European Union, because then it wouldn't be a problem if we could, in solidarity, also share the responsibility for these children. It would work much better.
But I have a few questions on that. And on one level, in terms of domestic growth, there are reports that saying 42% of long-term unemployment in Sweden is immigrants, and 58% of welfare payments go to immigrants. Is there an issue? Is that is just a matter of time? Is that a matter of integration or the challenges of integration? And again, it makes me question, and what is the long-term impact, this refugee crisis, on Sweden 5 years from now in terms of economic stability?
No, this is a very relevant question, because what we have seen until now is that we have managed also earlier in our history to deal with a big influx of refugees, like in the 90s, when we received so many asylum seekers from the Balkans, and almost as many as we have today. They were well integrated, but it was easy then to house them. We had apartments, we had jobs to offer, and it will take some time, because on average it will take almost 7 years to get fully sort of established and integrated. And I think we have not succeeded with the integration phase lately. So it takes too long for people to find a job, and of course now it means also that it will be more difficult to find even schooling for all the children that come. And 1 or 2 years of delay when it comes to getting a child into school, of course, is an enormous a burden and a problem also for us. So that's where we are today. That's what the challenges look like. But over time, they will be integrated. They will manage. They will find jobs and so. So most of them will. But of course, during a number of years, it is a responsibility on the state budget and the local budgets as well.
And talking about that, this is impacting the 1% of Swedish contribution to international aid, which is one of the very few countries in the world that does that. And what I understand is that Sweden is diverting 20% of that contribution into dealing with the internal refugee crisis. Are you worried about the impact of that on the long term in the countries, whether it be in Africa or the Middle East or Asia or wherever it is, in the source countries, in destabilizing perhaps some of that?
No, we've managed to be generous, to keep a generous development budget. We are within the DAC rules, as they are called, the OECD rules on how to use also some money for welcoming refugees and taking care of refugees, and we are still among the most generous countries in the world to contribute to both the UN systems, to the refugee, the High Commissioner for Refugees, etc., etc. But of course, now there is a discussion. If these kind of numbers of refugees continue, what kind of budgetary effects will it mean, and where should we take the money to that? What areas should contribute? This is not a decision made but a debate about how to take the economic consequences forward. So no decision is being made, and of course we are looking at the consequences of that, or taking loans, or doing something else to make sure that we can cover the costs. So it's a purely theoretical debate at the moment.
But I want to quote a Swedish historian, Lars Lagarde, if I'm saying him correctly. He says, he describes that there is a clash of ideals in Sweden. The traditional Swedish ideals and self-image have revolved around a pride and in recognition of the nation state, where citizens work hard and pay taxes. But a more recently developed Swedish ideal has been more of a universal human rights forces that sometimes places the instinct to help as many refugees as possible ahead of traditional priority of a nation state, such as security, high employment levels, ensuring housing and social welfare for existing citizens, and protecting its borders. The tension I'm referring of is also rise of right-wing parties in Sweden, because of that tension and the refugee issues. How do you deal with that? How do you address that in a productive way for Sweden?
I don't think that there is such a contradiction in Swedish people. I think Swedes we have a long tradition of being a country fighting for democracy and human rights, for defending development assistance, for doing humanitarian assistance around the world, for being generous, showing solidarity. I think this goes very deep it's ingrained in the Swedish in Swedish people and their idea of a good society to live in. And I really think that for us as political leaders, it is important to fight for every Swedish citizen, also for the asylum, those who come and seek asylum in Sweden, to make sure that we continue to be generous, but we also have to defend our basic ideas of what forms and constitutes a good society to live in. So our systems of a generous sort of welfare society has, with lesser gaps between groups of people, has been and is a good society to live in, and we will continue to fight for those principles. And now it's a matter of where do we take the money for that? How do we defend also our systems while at the same time being generous? And we have done it before, and we will manage also this time. But we also say that there is, of course, a limit to our systems that deal with these things. You know, there is a limit to how many children you can, in a short period of time, place in school or find housing for. So this is it's a very practical problem to solve at the moment. And that's why we insist also on European solidarity and sharing the responsibility and the burden. So this is to all people in the UK as well.
Well, before handing over the discussion to the people in the UK, which I would love to give the opportunity for our guests in here, I want to have one last personal question, or two maybe, switching to the personal. Do you think, first of all, you have two sons? And you gave a commencement speech recently, and we are here speaking with mostly students. What are your advice for students who are just about to go out in the world and are attending a center for women, peace, and security? So their ambition is to be you in the future. What is your advice for them?
Well, I'm so old that I even have 2 grandchildren by now, but to my own sons, I've said that I realize that I can't ask much of you. You form and shape your own lives, but if there is one thing I ask from you, it is to do something for someone else. and remember that life is more than self-service, so do something unselfish. And the second advice is to read books. And I even had a motto in Swedish, which they of course immediately turned into something else. But I think you have to read novels, short stories, biographies, and I read a lot, and I think that this has taught me so much about human life. And I think it is Franz Kafka who has said that a book should be like an axe to the frozen sea within us. So read books, and I also think my third advice would be let your values be your backbone. Reading about people who I find very courageous and people to admire, what they have in common is a very clear sense of what is right and what is wrong. And they are willing to live according to that and even take risks or sacrifice something. So I think you should let your values be your inner compass in life. That will help a lot.
Well, beautifully said, beautifully said. Thank you so much. Beautifully said. Now I want to open it up to our audience here, if you have any questions. All right, there's a question over there. If you can introduce yourself, stand up perhaps, and write to the question, please.
Först skulle jag säga välkommen utrikesminister Wallström.
Tack så mycket.
My name is Tatjani Preifeld, and I am an LSE Master Student in Human Rights. As a Swedish national, I'm very proud that we are the first EU nation to recognize the state of Palestine. Now, after the celebration of this recognition has been made, what are the benefits that have been done, especially towards Palestine women and girls? Thank you very much.
Thank you for speaking Swedish to me, and thank you for that question. We started this new government by making a decision to recognize the state of Palestine. This was a way to open up, to make the two parties sort of less unequal, because they are already unequal, but made them a little bit less unequal. And we wanted to provide some hope for young Palestinians, to say that there must be opened a political route in between having to accept a more and more desperate situation, because status quo is just getting more and more desperate, or taking to violence. So there has to be a door or a window opened with a political perspective of having their own state, or at least a two-state solution that was once, for many years ago, introduced for this part of the world. So we wanted to do that. It opened up, of course, also a responsibility on us to engage with the Palestinians, to push for reform, to push for them to become more democratic, and for them to work on, for example, gender issues. And this is also where we direct money, also in projects, and how we work with the Palestinians. And this is indeed very, very important to us, also including economic opportunities for women to become entrepreneurs and to create new jobs and job opportunities for Palestinians. So it means that we also have a channel to work with them at the moment. And this is not easy as the situation is right now, with too much of, or an escalating spiral of violence, and a rather bleak look at the future. But we continue to insist also that this issue stays on the European Union's agenda, and that we can also influence the Israelis, of course, to stop the settlements and live up to their commitment to a two-state solution.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a question.
Tack så mycket, Margot. My name is Anders. I'm also from Sweden. I'm very proud to have you as our foreign minister, especially concerning who we had before you. My question is very related to the previous question. I wasn't going to ask it because it's not really related to gender in that sense. But in 2011, the Social Democratic Congress promised to... I lost the words now. But give Western Sahara their... status as an official country, recognize West Sahara. Thank you. You did the same promise in the election campaign in 2014. I just wonder what happened to that promise. Thank you.
What happened to that promise is that we asked an ambassador here at the Foreign Ministry to look into all the legal aspects, the United Nations process, and the situation on the ground to give us a fully updated picture of where we are when it comes to the issue of Western Sahara. And we have given him until beginning of next year to come to present his report, and then we will make a decision based on that. Because we also saw that there was an opening for the UN representation, and we wanted to adapt also our position, looking into also the legal situation on this issue. So we will come back to that issue within shortly.
All right, thank you. Let's go to questions here, perhaps.
My name's Roman. I'm not Swedish. Oh, do I have to turn this on?
I was going to say.
I'm actually Australian. And my question is about the practice of diplomacy itself. You've talked a lot about becoming more inclusive towards women in foreign policy and also in terms of pushing issues that affect women. But what I wonder is whether you see the institutions of international diplomacy like the UN and the EU needing to actually change the way they function to become more inclusive and more conducive to promoting women's rights.
Of course, the United Nations have definitely proven that they have been not effective and have been paralyzed almost when it comes to solving the problems in Syria, as the most telling example and the clearest example recently. So our agenda for the UN is an agenda of reforming how the UN works. That includes also discussing with countries who say that one step on that way could be to restrict the use of the veto, so that in cases of suspicion of crimes against humanity or genocide, that the veto cannot be used, that there should be an agreement between the P5 countries not to use the veto. But we think that the Security Council has to become, and the UN has to become more representative, has to become more effective, and it has to become more transparent. And this is overdue. To work, for example, with African countries right now, they feel that it's an obsolete system that does not allow permanent representation of Africa, for example, and this is clear to everybody. So that's what we have to work on. So I totally agree that it has shown its shortcomings too clearly over the last few years.
Thank you. And there another question over there. Let's just stay in this side for a while.
Is it on? Yeah, okay. My question for you is basically, in the UK, obviously, we still, for women, there's still quite a lot of gender inequality. We still pay tax on tampons. There's still a gender pay gap. We also still there's still a big, I personally think, difference between men's rights and women's rights in the UK. How can we advise our government and talk as citizens about how we can influence a feminist foreign policy, and when we do live in a country where we have those issues?
I believe that nowhere has women's rights been respected or fulfilled without women fighting for it. So there has to be a political or civil society or media fight for women's rights first. There has to be a clear agenda. And when I started, more than 20 years ago, also as a minister for gender equality, the agenda was unfortunately very much the same as it is today. It had to do with violence against women, to fight violence against women. This is a problem in the whole world. Still, women are being beaten to death, and the most dangerous place in many countries is the home. It was a matter of equal pay for equal work. It was a matter of sharing the responsibility for the home, the work at home and with children. It was a matter of making sure that women are represented as in political life and everywhere where important decisions are being made. And I guess that's a very basic, and of course to make sure that in the normative framework that exists in countries that women's rights are being spelled out. So I think that this is still the basic agenda in many countries, and I think you just have to team up with others, I guess, because who am I to tell the UK government what to do? It is for you to decide what the priorities should be, but I think that these are issues that women have in common almost around the whole world. The rights, the representation, and the resources, and of course the legal framework to protect them, to give them, ensure that they have those rights. Gang up.
Fantastic. Now let's move to this side of the story. Yes, please.
Is it on? Is it working? Hello, my name is Luma. I'm press, but what I wanted to really ask you about, first of all, your speech was very inspirational for me. I recently volunteered with refugees in Holland, and working with them firsthand, I'm trying to put an integration program together. So one thing I wanted to ask you is, how important is integration now? Like integration programs, I noticed in most of Europe, there's not many of them, although there's like a huge refugee crisis. And we informally kind of implemented some of the ideas that we think might help refugees integrate quicker, and they seem to be working. So I wanted to know, how important is that? How high is it on the agenda to find and to implement them and to propose them to yourself and to governments in Europe? Yeah, I just wanted to...
This is key, of course, that you have everything from language, learning the language, to have your skills and your examiner and everything validated, to actually getting a job and having, getting your life together. So integration is key. It is more difficult in a situation where we have so many people coming at the same time. You cannot do it orderly, and I think now it is very much improvised, but also by volunteers who do a fantastic job. And thank you for everything that you've been doing, because without them, we would be much worse off. And so I think they have done an absolutely marvelous job. I think just announcing that you want to be a contact family is a simple thing that will help both yourself and the asylum seekers. We have tried that ourselves, so I can tell that it works and how important it is. But the systems also have to be put in place to ensure that those who come and are already trained as doctors or or engineers actually can find a job as quickly as possible and can have can learn the language and also find their place in the Swedish society. So integration is key, and now it's just a matter of the massive influx of so many refugees that hampers also the development of effective systems, but we are doing our best.
Let's go there in the middle. I'll come back to you.
I wish I could see you. See your necks.
That's why describe your at least say your name. It's helpful.
Yeah, my name is Arifa. I'm from Afghanistan, and I'm a student at University of East London. I'm doing international development. My question is very general about your all speech about you speak about women, peace and security, oil crisis in Sweden, and human immigration crisis. Who is actually responsible of all this crisis in the world that's happening? Women suffer after the new liberal agenda and the war and terror agenda after 9/11. Afghanistan affected, Iraq affected, and Libya, Syria is now under a very chronic situation. And you mentioned that all this immigration come with dirt and with lots of problem. But if their country is in the peace, they wouldn't leave their country. They wouldn't come to. And if a woman in their country in peace, they could go to school and they could educate it. They can participate in the decision making. If this all not available in a country like developing Afghanistan, Iraq, but how it could be possible to we fight against violence, we can fight against immigration. You can't stop immigration. Now, immigration is kind of a big, huge problem is coming to the West. And who is the responsible for all of that? The mistake of the UN, the mistake of the Bush and Tony Blair that make a mistake in Iraq, that they couldn't find any nuclear weapon, and or the who's the we can blame. And
thank you. Thank you.
I don't know if it was a rhetorical question. We're supposed to say men with weapons and money and power. But of course, to speak legally, it is the responsibility of a government of a country for the safety and security of their civilians, and to ensure that they have a life in dignity and that they are well protected. But in many of these situations, it is really sectorism. It is power. It is the military forces. It is a combination of all of these complex factors that also makes the ground for armed conflict and wars. And very often it is not to generalize too much to say that until now women have been more the victims than the ones with power and guns and money to be the actors in many of these conflicts, but rather the victims of wars and conflicts, and also the victims of, for example, sexual violence. I'm sure Zainab can speak also a lot to that particular subject. But this is the sad situation we are in. And let me add to that, that for example, in Syria, there were also 4 years of drought and environmental and climate change problems that created the ground for social unrest or exacerbated a situation that was already dangerous. We will see more of that, unfortunately. We might see wars and conflicts over the lack of drinking water and so on. So it is an unusually dangerous world we live in. We have never had so many ongoing armed conflicts and conflicts and full-scale wars. We have 40 conflicts and 11, they count 11 full-blown full-scale wars today, meaning that we've also never seen so many people as refugees fleeing their countries. So it is an extraordinary situation and a very dangerous one, if you ask me. But we need you also, as young people. We need you as leaders of tomorrow. And well, today already, I guess you're that age. Many of you can take on also political tasks. We need to engage a new generation in working for the good of our society. It's not enough to give thumbs up on Facebook. We need some leaders as well, and we need to meet them. We need to do the work on the ground. Please engage.
And on this note, actually, I think maybe one last question, the very last question. Maybe let's do it here, and that's it. We have 2 more minutes with Madam Minister.
Thank you. My name is Erin Duffy, and I'm a third-year international relations student here at LSE. I just wanted to say that I think Sweden has been leading the way by adopting a feminist foreign policy in implementing UN Security Council Resolution 1325. But why do you think so many other states have failed to take into consideration women, peace and security in their foreign policy agenda? For example, only 54 countries have adopted national action plans. Like, what problems are these states facing, and how can they be overcome?
Very good.
Well, it has to do with the existing power structures. Who decide? Who are the leaders? Where are the priorities? You have to be made aware of these issues, and you have to make a decision. You have to put women in charge. You have to make it possible for women also to play their full role in society, and you have to set an agenda for it. So it is a very traditional, hierarchical and system that I think does not take into account the needs and rights of women. So that's why we need to both formulate a policy in a proper way, and also continue to stick together and fight for an agenda that includes. I mean, for example, what we are now trying to turn our feminist foreign policy into an action plan for next year. So we have identified the priorities for next year that we will use the whole foreign ministry to do, and that has to do with, as I said, the human rights agenda, but also freedom from physical, psychological and sexual violence, to participate in preventing and solving armed conflict, and peace building after conflict. It has to do with political participation and influence in all areas of society. It has to do with economic rights and economic power, and it has to do with sexual and reproductive health and rights. So that's the agenda, or the priorities for next year. So that means we will involve all our embassies in making sure that they also live up to this. So it's just having to state, unfortunately, that the world still discriminates against women, and we have to continue to come together to fight it and ensure that we can enjoy equal rights.
It has been an absolute pleasure being in this conversation with you. You are truly inspiring for me personally, and I'm sure for everyone in here. Thank you so, so much. Keep up the great work, and we are all with you and behind you and inspired by you. Thank you. And good night. I know it's late in Sweden.
Yes. Thank you all for listening and for all your clever questions as well. And good luck to you, Zainab. Thank you
very much
for doing this, and all of you at LSE. Good luck with everything.
Thank you very much.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Maybe we should give a very special applause also for Zainab for all of this.